This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome everybody to the latest edition of Doc and Jock. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Here we are. It's fall, so you know what that means. Football. Michigan State, the Detroit Lions, and their 53-man roster. Early thoughts on their practice squad signings that we know about at the time of recording. It's going to be a fun podcast. Can't wait to break it all down. And even a Detroit Tigers baseball team, are they making a charge? Going to break it all down with my guy, Adam the Jock Strozinski. Before it's Football Fest, cuz, are you buying at all into any of the Detroit Tigers hype? Look, they're playing a bunch of crappy teams. Look, if the Tigers could play the Angels all the time, they would be division winners, but they're not. They got a big series coming up against the Red Sox. Look, I'm watching, but I'm in no way believing that this is a team that's going to make the playoffs or that it's even really a playoff chase. But I look at it like, look, it's young guys getting their opportunities, and it's good to see some of them start to perform at a level where you can say, all right, maybe Chris Ilitch can invest into one or two free agents. So that's how I'm looking at the Detroit Tigers. I think that they're steadily building a little bit more intrigue. But look, it's a 500 baseball team. I think I picked them to win 86 to 85 games this season. But I just think that people are wanting so desperately for their baseball team to succeed that they're trying to extrapolate that this winning streak against bad teams, I think they're 12-3 the last 15, that this means that they're potentially a playoff contender. And it's just, look, getting to the wild card and getting beat is not the goal of any baseball team. But look, hey, if you're going to go out there and play with young guys, it's fun to win. It's been fun for the last 2 weeks.
Bro, I was so shocked that you wanted to add this to the rundown for a conversation for us to talk about. This team is not garnering any of my attention right now. They are so far in the background. I have left the Detroit Tigers dead and buried sometime recently after the All-Star game. It didn't get much further after that, and I was like, all right, cool, time to move on. We got Lions going on. There's all kinds of stuff going on with Michigan that we're going to have to talk about. I think Michigan State might be a bit of a threat in the Big Ten this year. My focus and my attention has been drawn away from the Tigers. And yeah, it's nice to see that they're above 500 and they're playing okay baseball. But like you said, it's against bad teams. It's cool to see that some of the young guys are doing things. Do me a favor. Wake me up when the guy who writes the checks gets off of his ass and goes out there and spends some money on somebody. Wake me up when the general manager who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room can help build a team that can be a legit playoff contender. I'm not even saying a World Series contender, a playoff contender. Right now, this team is on the outside, and they are on the way outside looking in. It's an interesting little run that they're putting together right now, but I'm not giving them any of my attention. I am not tuning into any games. If I'm driving in the truck and there's a baseball game that happens to be on, and I'm in the middle of flipping through stations on Sirius, and I'm at Nothing I Really Like, or they're all at commercials or whatever the heck's going on, I might bounce over and listen to Dan Dickerson tell me about what's going on for that little bit of an inning. But then I'm bouncing right back to something else. I'll just kind of check in, check out, but they get zero of my attention, dude. I am not spending any time on this Tiger team. If you are unwilling to spend money in your offseason to put a contender on the field, why am I going to spend my time in late August, creeping into September, to give you any of my attention when you didn't do enough? And then at the trade deadline, you sit there and you trade away pieces, and you've got a team now that could be in a bit of a spot where they could maybe make some noise, but you have to realize that you're basically doing bullpen days every, 3 days out of every 5 right now, and you've got Tarek Skubal pitching, every 6th or 7th day. So, like, come on, man. This team, if you're a Tigers fan, good for you. Go ahead and watch. I'm not going to tell you not to support what you love, all right? Because some sickos out there, they love baseball, and it's their deal. I get it. It's cool. I'm like that with hockey. Go ahead, support your Tigers. But no, man, I'm not paying this team any minds. Not right now. Not yet. Talk to me later on in the year if they're still in contention and they have an actual chance to get into the playoffs. Then we could revisit this discussion. The fact that you wanted to add this to the roster or to the rundown today annoyed me so much. I was like, I can't believe this guy wants to add this shit. We've got such a jam-packed, fun show to talk about today. There's so much stuff. You got my Connor Stallions reaction coming up later in this podcast. We've got Detroit Lions. We got the 53-man roster, 52-man roster, not even 53. Wonder why. We're going to talk about all of that. We've got MSU. We've got Michigan. They're right around the corner. And you want to add this crap in? Get the hell out of here, bro.
Look, 5-6 minutes is no problem. Look, you got Young, McKinstry, Torkelson came back, doing a little something. Look, they're young guys. They're doing some things. Colt Key swinging the bat. So what we'll say is keep your eyes open, pay attention to the box scores, and it's all about development. And these young guys are kind of, it's like one of those things where they don't even know any better. They're just going out there and competing, and they're beating shitty teams. So
wait, let me ask you this real quick. So this team right now, getting hot end of the season. If I recall last year, this team got hot at the end of the season. And we rolled into the offseason, and they didn't really do anything. Do you see the same thing happening where this team's going to get white hot? They're going to make a little bit of a run and just fall a couple games short like last year. And again, the man who signs the checks, Mr. Little Caesar himself, is going to be little with the scratch and not bring anybody in to help this team out. Do you see that happening one more time next year?
I do. I see it happening, but with players similar to what you did this year that you can flip. And they got to be selective. Look, you got Flaherty and you got some guys that you could potentially see some rewards from in a couple years. I see maybe one targeted free agent that can be somebody that helps maybe in the bullpen or a starter. So look, you're not going to spend just yet. It's still year 2 of Scott Harris, but I think that you're starting to see, and that was the only goal this year, is to start to see some of the young players. And Young, Keith, Veerling's doing some things. Kerry Carpenter, I think his return has sparked the offense. Riley Green has, battled a couple injuries, but he's still raking. So this is a baseball team that's starting to, I'll just say, pay attention to the young guys because they are developing. And it's right. You should be upset because this team could have won the division if they added, but I think they're just taking the rebuilding approach. And unfortunately, we can't force them to spend and open their paybook, open their checkbook. We can't force it. So at the time, the reason why they made the list is they've won a bunch of games. They've had a good August. And so all we're saying is DSP is alerting people to kind of still pay attention. Don't fall off the wagon like Adam and just dismiss them because they don't spend. Pay attention a little bit. The Boston series will be telling, and we'll come back next week and recap what happened because they could be just 3 to 4 games out of the wild card going into September. And then at the end of the year, you're playing the White Sox, and those are kind of freebies. So there's a chance, a small chance, but a chance. So you can't just completely dismiss the Detroit Tigers. But yes, let's get into it. Football Fest. It's time. The Detroit Lions put together and released their 53-man roster, but only had currently 52 players on it until they made moves on Wednesday. But I'll say this. You look at this roster and you say, yeah, you can kind of see the 5 to 6 spots that Dan Campbell was talking about. The only thing that bothered me was that Donovan Peoples-Jones was let go, but they found a way to bring him back to the practice squad. I'm not certain why. He didn't show anything that indicated he deserved a spot. I don't know if he's battling something or whatever happened. His situation, just in terms of what he brought to the table, wasn't much. But I'm glad that Jake Fromm made his way to the practice squad. That might indicate Nate Sudfeld's time in Detroit is over. I think people were so excited to hear that Sudfeld is no longer part of the organization per se because there's still roster moves that could happen. It's still fluid. We're talking on a Wednesday afternoon, but I love the fact that this football team had such close competitions at so many spots that you realize the 5 to 6 spots, yeah, they're role players, special teams, but you're excited to see what this football team's about. And to me, I think that the defense is a lot better when you look at this roster. So many depth pieces that we're talking about. I think the biggest concern that people have that is still there because the guy that you brought in from Denver has an injury history. But to me, to summarize, I think this 53-man roster is very competitive, and I do think, though, they need 1 to 2 more players at the deadline to solidify any concerns that may pop up. But right now, this is a football team that clearly can win double-digit games, and you just can't wait to see the Detroit Lions starters, offense, defense, and special teams, go out there. And it seems like the luck of the Lions is starting to take over. The Rams traded a significant member of their defense, and one of their starting left tackles is suspended. So the Rams are coming in a spot that's totally different than the Lions, and that's good news for the team. What was your reaction to the roster? Do you like it? Did anything stick out? Did anything bother you that has raised an alarm for you to say, wait a minute, they still need to address it?
Well, I was pretty surprised with the Nate Sudfeld release, especially after comparing that with what Dan Campbell was saying the week prior. And then you go into the final preseason game, Nate Sudfeld doesn't take a snap. They basically gave everything to Hendon Hooker and Jake Fromm. And it was basically Hooker's job as far as the backup quarterback position goes to win or lose. And he won it. And that's good. That's awesome to see. That makes me excited. It tells me that it validates that draft pick for Brad Holmes, because this team, the way that they have been building, it is win now. And you go out and you spend a 3rd-round pick on a quarterback who's going to be your backup. It makes you raise eyebrows, makes you scratch your head, makes you say, all right, Brad, what are you trying to do here? And if this was going to be another year where another high draft pick, because I consider a 3rd-round draft pick to be a high draft pick, when you draft another high draft pick and they're not able to get on the field and they're not able to contribute, what's going on here? Or they're not able to get that roster spot that you had envisioned. What's going on here? And it makes you kind of start to question some of the moves that Brad Holmes may be making or has made in the past. So this to me just helps kind of validate what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell seen in Hendon Hooker. He went out, he won the job. He did a lot of really good things in the preseason. Obviously, there's still more development that has to be done, and he has to put a couple of other things together to really kind of take that next step in his growth. All that being said, he is not going to be the starter of this team. Jared Goff is your starter. This is going to be a guy who, if Jared Goff gets hurt, hopefully he doesn't, knock on wood, he doesn't, but if Jared Goff is to get hurt, this is a guy who can come in, kind of steady the ship, help you win a game or two until maybe Jared Goff can get back. So with Nate Sudfeld getting moved out, Hendon Hooker takes that spot, solidifies that role. Again, surprised about Sudfeld, excited about Hooker. DPJ, I was surprised that they brought him back to the practice squad. That is, I'm just like, why? Like, Caden Davis should have been the guy you brought back to the practice squad. Like, I get he's another slot receiver, but he showed more than DPJ did. So I didn't understand that move. That just kind of has me sitting here like, what the hell's going on? I do like the fact that Fromm was added to the practice squad. Now, look, it's one game. He's playing against 3rd and 4th stringers. He's playing against guys who are trying to make the league. But still, he looked decent. He looked good. He handled the ball well, handled the position well. Being in camp for a very limited amount of time, he looked good out there. So it tells me that there's stuff there that you can develop and you can work on. And if something was to, again, happen to Goff or Hooker, you can kind of go into your practice squad, pull this guy up, and he'll be able to back somebody up or be able to give you a couple of reps if need be. So I was excited about that. On the defensive side of the ball, I think you're right. You can see this team is light years ahead of last year. This team is so much stronger on the defensive side of the ball. And I think the thing that really caught my eye was a couple of the guys that you and I had talked about last week. Was it Ibuke? And there was another guy that you really liked. He was a defensive end. I'm sorry, it's not coming to my head right off the bat. But both those guys were released. Both those guys were cut. And to me, that was really interesting because these were guys that both you and I kind of drilled down on, and both you and I were like, okay, we could see these guys making the team. These guys did a lot of really good work in the preseason games that we've seen. You were in camp. They did a lot of good things in camp, and still, these guys were on the outside looking in. So it tells me that this defense is further ahead than it was last year. I think when you look up and down the roster, there's a lot of depth there compared to where it was last year. And they had to get rid of a lot of good players. They had to let go of a lot of really good players, and this is kind of the results of it. So I'm excited to see what this team's going to do rolling into this season. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And then this team goes out and they pick up a guy like Tim Patrick, right? Because there's a lot of guys out there that they can add to this team. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to kind of talk about Tim Patrick because there were rumors and there was noise starting to come out of Denver that they were looking to possibly trade him. They were looking to possibly move him. And for the Lions to be able to go out there and grab him, you remember 2-3 years ago, Tim Patrick was a pretty big deal for Denver. He did a really good job for Denver. Tim Patrick now banged up the last couple of years. If he can stay healthy, he's 6'4", he's 220. The guy catches stuff that's thrown to him, runs good routes. I feel confident that Tim Patrick will be on this roster when the season starts. He's going to digest this playbook, and he's going to figure things out. He's going to be your big body target down low. Could you see a situation where Tim Patrick doesn't stay healthy, isn't able to get on the field, and they have to go out and they have to make a trade for a big body wide receiver?
Well, it's tough because the Lions are so stubborn, and they may still go to DPJ because this individual is still working his way back from injury. There's a legitimate chance that DPJ could be a call-up in elevation week 1. So DPJ, for whatever reason, given chance after chance after chance. First of all and foremost, the defensive players you're talking about are Ukwu and Agude. And I just think that James Houston made it a little bit tough because of his skill. He got a sack against the Steelers, so that solidifies the defense. And you still got Marcus Davenport and others like that. Betts was a little bit tough to see, too, because he worked hard, but you could tell that maybe hopefully he gets a chance on the practice squad. Still not official as of Wednesday afternoon, so we'll see if Ukwu or others come back on the practice squad. Right now it's like 4 or 5 official members on the practice squad. You look at it from the wide receiver perspective. I know a lot of people are talking about it. I've always said that, look, this is somebody that's probably going to get 20 catches most for the year. You got 6 guys ahead of this individual that should be targeted. And just look at it. If it's third down, and you're not going to St. Brown, Jamo, Laporta, Brock Wright, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Vaki, Khalif Raymond, so that's why I just think that it's great to talk about wide receiver 4. It's great to talk about a big body guy, but I just think that Jamo and Laporta and Gibbs, those 3 guys will make up Josh Reynolds' production. So I just think people are very oversensitive and they just think that, they don't have the big body because the Lions say they love the guy, but they just can't find the right person to do the job this training camp, and it's just the way it is. But I do think that, yes, Josh Reynolds is a loss, but they weren't going to pay him that much money when you see the money that was allocated to Goff, and it's just one of those situations. Josh Reynolds was a cap casualty, and that's just the way it is. And to me, I just think that Tim Patrick is low risk. You see what he's got. You see if he can develop, and clearly Dan Campbell can call up Sean Payton and say, okay, tell me the scoop. This is a good locker room guy. He'll do the job. Boom, boom, boom. It's just low risk because you can't expect anything. The man's coming back from, look at this situation, similar to Mosley. He tears his ACL, and then the next year comes back and ruptures his Achilles. I mean, that's rough. Mm-hmm. He's a grinder, so I'll give him credit to grind, but I just don't think you can expect anything from him until you see a couple, probably first couple weeks are learning, and so you won't even probably notice anything about Tim Patrick until the second half, the second quarter of the season. You got enough. Like you can just store Tim Patrick away, do what you got to do for the first month of the season, and you can revisit it. I do think he's a big body guy. He'll do the job, but I just think that right now DPJ will be utilized more than Tim Patrick to start.
See, I disagree. I don't think DPJ. He didn't show anything.
Nothing.
Like he's a body out there. What about this name? So if Tim Patrick doesn't work out, right? If for some reason body's just completely falling apart, can't stay healthy, can't really grasp what they want him to grasp as far as the playbook goes. He just can't do what they're looking for him to do. This is a guy who wanted to come here. This is a guy who has connections to this roster. I believe he'll be a good roster guy, and I believe he is also, like you said, a bit of a grinder. He's also a bigger body guy. I didn't realize he was this big. He's 6'5". He's about 215 pounds. What about Equanimeous St. Brown, Amon-Ra's brother? What if he was to come in if for some reason Tim Patrick doesn't work out? He was released. He was out there. He's got familiarity with Green Bay, familiarity with Chicago, as he spent the last couple of seasons with both of those teams, so he's familiar with the NFC North. His brother plays here. The family ties are there. He seems like he's a good guy. I don't think he would be a locker room cancer. You could obviously go out there, get him on the cheap, I would assume, if Tim Patrick doesn't work out. Do you see them possibly taking a chance or a flyer on Equanimeous St. Brown? This was a guy who they passed on in the offseason. They said, no, we're good. Could they bring him back in, you think?
Interesting, right? Because maybe it was contract. You do think that there's a familial tie, but it's something to say that the guy's been cut now from a couple different spots, and for whatever reason has dealt with injuries. I just don't think that, I think that once the team, he expressed interest openly, the team didn't want it, and so maybe there's an opportunity down the road. But I was
shocked at how big he was. I didn't realize he was 6'5", 215.
Yeah.
Like, that is a big dude right there. Amon-Ra, I don't want to say Amon-Ra is small or slight because he's, like, absolutely jacked and chiseled. But, like, I didn't realize he was that big. And like, when I look at Amon-Ra, I'm not like, well, you're gargantuan. You know what I'm saying? I feel like Amon-Ra's a pretty average build for a wide receiver. You put it in perspective, 6'5", 215. That's a big MFer. So I was just shocked. I'm like, physically, you are exactly what they want. You are exactly what they are looking for. To me, it makes all the sense in the world if Tim Patrick doesn't work out to go after that guy. But I get what you're saying.
It's crazy because he probably would put in some effort, and he already knows the culture. So it's crazy. It's just one of those things where you can see this football team. Look, they went out and they made the waiver claim for a familiar face in Trevor Nowaski. You likely are going to bring back Pecco and put John Kaminsky on IR. And so I just look at this roster and say, look, a lot of good pieces, still work to be done. I do think that this is a football team that will be aggressive when the opportunity presents itself to go out there and put together the football team to give this team the best chance. And when this podcast drops, Brad Holmes will address the media Thursday morning, so there'll be more information regarding some reasons why some of the decisions were made, some thoughts from the general manager regarding the assembly of the roster, the practice squad. So I just think the roster, Lions on SI graded a B+. What grade would you give the roster? And are you comfortable saying, okay, for the first month of the season, you may not have DJ Reader for week 1, but he could be available. Broderick Martin goes on IR. You get a little bit of an injury bug there. But it's still a football team that we're going to talk about Jared Goff here. You got the quarterback and the offense that I think is going to really lead this football team. And you just need the defense to hold on and do their job and just bend, don't break, be a little aggressive, be opportunistic at times. If the offense, I think, can take a big step forward from last year, and that should be enough to help this team win at least 10 to 11 games.
See, I see it a little bit different. I think what they did defensively really helps move this team forward. You're basically underselling, and you're not expecting much out of this defense. I am expecting a lot out of this defense this year. With all of the capital that they invested, with all of the pieces that they've added to this team on the defensive side of the ball, I'm expecting this defense to really hold its own and possibly win this team a couple of games. This team is usually winning games based upon what the offense does. If you have to get into a shootout, the team's going to sit there and go out and put up 45, 50 points. If the team needs to control the clock so the defense doesn't get put in a bad spot, they're going to go out there and run the ball 47 times if they have to, and they're going to kill the clock. So I think this team is built to lean on this offense, but I think now you can take some of that pressure off of the offense, and you can now count on that defense to give you a little bit of a breath, give you a little bit of a respite if you need it, and you can go out there and now win games a little bit more differently. I think this team is incredibly dynamic because of what they've done defensively. I get DJ Reader might not be there, but I think up front you have enough pieces, especially if Levi Onwuzurike is as good as Dan Campbell has pumped him up to be. I think you'll be okay up front. I think that secondary, look, I know they're rookies, and I know you're expecting a lot, but you basically got 2 first-round cornerbacks out of this draft, guys who you are expecting to give you plenty of reps and do a lot of really good things. Brian Branch was a steal last year, and he did a lot of great things for you. I'm expecting him to take a monster step forward as well. So I think defensively, this team is much better. I do find the Broderick Martin placed on IR to be interesting. Like what? Broderick Martin is one of those things where that draft pick might come back to haunt this team because to me, he hasn't found footing. I haven't seen enough from him. I don't necessarily understand if he was that much better than anybody else who may have gotten cut. I feel like you could have swapped in either one of those guys that we were talking about last week and put Broderick Martin on waivers, and you'd have been fine. I think the only thing that kept Broderick Martin here was the fact that he was a third-round pick for this team. So Broderick Martin is quite interesting to me. But I think this roster overall, even with the wide receiver issue that they're having, I think that this roster is so much better than last year's. I'm going to say it's an A-. Look, I think there's still a couple of pieces and there's still a couple of things that might need to get shored up, and we'll see as the season goes along. I think trade deadline is right around week 6, so we've got plenty of time. You're going to get DJ Reader back, so that'll be a big boost to that defense, and we'll kind of be able to hit the ground running and kind of get going from there. But I like what this roster has done. I like the way this roster is constructed. I like what they've done on defense. I feel like defensively they are light years ahead of where they were last year, even when they ended the season, when they were playing pretty well. I think offensively, this team has tools all over the place. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be incredibly interesting, and how they use him is going to be incredibly interesting. Tim Patrick, I could see being a guy who makes the opening day roster, and he's that big body wide receiver you've got. Again, you've got Amon-Ra, who's a stud. J-Mo, we're expecting to take big steps forward in our family fantasy draft. I felt like you reached for him a little bit. I think you took him in the 4th round. This was a guy who was projected to go a little bit later in the draft. You went out and you're like, no, this guy's going to make a monster impact. I'm grabbing him now. So you're seeing these pieces on offense. And then you've got Jared Goff, who I feel like is a very good quarterback. I feel like Jared Goff, at this stage of his career, top 7 quarterback in the league. And then you've got guys out there, anonymous head coaches, taking pot shots at our guy, saying he can't win a Super Bowl. What's your reaction to this anonymous head coach saying this about Jared Goff? And if you want to, kind of fill in a little bit of the story from The Athletic with these anonymous reports on Jared Goff not being the guy to get it done for the Lions.
Yeah, just every year teams will go out there and talk to general managers anonymously so that they do talk. And look, one of them said, coaches, general managers, things like that. They said, hey, Jared Goff reminds them of a Kirk Cousins, some positive things. But one head coach said, hey, look, this is a situation in which this quarterback probably won't win the big one. And the biggest knock was the fact that they said, look, that this basically opened up the can of worms to say this is a guy that's kind of been handed everything and poo-pooing what his contributions are to this football team. And I was just like, wow, wait a minute here. Not being confident that Jared Goff could lead a 2-minute comeback. I just think that there's a happy medium. I think it was a little bit disrespectful. It made it come from the Rams. You never know. So, yeah.
Well, here's the deal. Let's do this real quick. I think we both agree Patrick Mahomes right now, best quarterback in the league, right? So you want to talk about being handed things and getting weapons and this and that, right? Patrick Mahomes, arguably best quarterback in the league. Patrick Mahomes is playing with a Hall of Famer and arguably the greatest tight end to ever play in Travis Kelce. Patrick Mahomes also has a offensive guru as a head coach, a guy who has been able to, from day one, dumb the playbook down to get Patrick Mahomes brought up and then allow Patrick Mahomes the ability to flourish in that offense and have enough autonomy to basically do what he wants to do. And Patrick Mahomes, up until probably 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, had a really good offensive line. He's always had a decent running back or a very good running back. I don't care what you say about Kareem Hunt. I know that he had a couple of unfortunate incidents. Kareem Hunt, when they drafted him, was a stud running back. Isaiah Pacheco, stud running back. They've seemed to always figure it out with the running back position. And then they've got gadget guys all over that roster. So you can't tell me that Patrick Mahomes also doesn't have weapons. I get his wide receiver core is kind of anemic. I understand that, but you got guys everywhere else on that roster. And then if you want to kind of move down the list, a guy who's probably very comparable to Jared Goff, a guy who was here, Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford goes on and wins a Super Bowl in L.A. with an incredibly offensive-minded head coach who developed basically a playbook for him. He's playing with an out-of-this-world wide receiver in Cooper Kupp. They just drafted another out-of-this-world wide receiver in Puka Nacua. They've had a glut of running backs over there, so much so that they just kind of annexed one last season, halfway through the season, and now you've got Kyron Williams, who's an absolute stud. So you've got pieces there as well. Like I feel like that is such a cheap and easy way out, is when you just sit there and you take shots at what they have on their roster. If anything, that's a kudos to Brad Holmes for putting pieces around this guy so we can go out there and do his job more effectively. Let's keep going down the list here of really good quarterbacks. I'm not even sure who you would probably go next. I don't think Tua Tagovailoa is any great shakes as a quarterback, but Tua, he's got multiple wide receivers, and he's got multiple running backs, and again, he's got an offensive-minded head coach. If you want to go Josh Allen has a ton of offensive weapons. It seems like it's a bit of a revolving door there because they just got rid of Stephon Diggs, but he's able to get things done with all of his offensive weapons. And then you go to what? You want to go Lamar Jackson? Lamar Jackson has second best tight end, third best tight end in the league in Mark Andrews. He's got different gadget guys that he can throw to offensively. They've always had a run game. They have this run game that is pretty exceptional, and it allows him to kind of take off and use what he does well with his legs. I mean, you can say this about all kinds of quarterbacks. I feel like it's easy. It's soft brain stuff to say Jared Goff has basically been handed everything and he can't get the job done. Jared Goff has showed you time and time again when this team's down, when they need a comeback, he's able to step up in the pocket and make the throw and make the play. I mean, this team would be in the Super Bowl playing if Reynolds would have made the catch last year, made 2 catches last year. Instead, he had a couple balls bounce off his hands, bounce off his face mask. And then you talk about face masks. Vildor had the same thing happen to him on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't feel like that's even fair to sit there and lump Jared Goff into a group like that. To me, it's lowbrow, low-hanging fruit. It seriously feels like it's a pot shot.
Well, I look at it and I say that's kind of the common knock, is to say that, hey, he's not athletic and things like that. So,
I mean, he is no Mahomes. He is no Lamar Jackson. And he's not built like Josh Allen, who is basically a refrigerator with arms. I get it. He's a different type of quarterback, but the guy has the ability to read defenses, has the ability to put the ball where it needs to go. Does he have a cannon for an arm like a guy like Matt Stafford? No. But does he have enough touch to where he can lay it up and put it where it's got to go? Yeah. Does he need you to do your job and run the route? Well, you got to be on the same page with him so he can put the ball where he needs to put the ball for you. And that was a big issue with J-Mo last year. J-Mo was on completely different pages than Jared Goff, and it sounds like they've got those things worked out. To me, it is frustrating to hear this about a guy. And look, you can go through, and I would love for you to name 9 more quarterbacks that you'd rather have than Jared Goff. Jared Goff is definitely a top 10 guy. In my book, he's a top 7 quarterback.
Yeah. It's I look at it from the perspective of everything going on with Jared Goff. It's a little bit of both. He does benefit from having a good football team, but at the same token, that's what you want. You want to make things easier for your quarterback, right? It shouldn't be used as a knock against him, because he's one of the brightest individuals that's out there, in my opinion. I think that he's somebody that should be credited. And you're right, he is a top 7 quarterback and things like that. But it'll be interesting to see if, down the road, does he get more credit for the stuff that he does down the road? You know what I mean? I think he'll get credit. Where do you think he can get better this year?
I think the deep ball for sure. I think with the addition of J-Mo, this offense should have a brand new layer to it. And I feel like it should be a little bit more explosive. I think that's the one thing that a lot of these anonymous head coaches or these anonymous GMs come back to, is just how explosive this offense is, right? Yeah, it's explosive because you got a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta who can just pick up yards after the catch. I think when you look at the air yards, if he could add more to that, so J-Mo stretching the field and him hitting J-Mo, I think that is one of those areas where all of a sudden you're looking at him completely different, because now he's able to throw the deep ball. He's able to stretch the field, and I think that would help open things up for a guy like Gibbs. I think that helps make running between the tackles easier for a guy like Montgomery. I think it also frees up guys like Laporta and Amon-Ra when they're out in the flats, because now you've got to put those safeties on high alert. They've got to sit back a little bit deeper, and it's going to force guys to kind of have to consider and respect the ability to go deep and go long on them. So for me, it's the next step, I guess, in what you want to see from him, and specifically from this offense, is really working in those long passes, working in those deep balls. And it's really J-Mo, getting J-Mo more involved in the offense and making it really pop, making it explode. If you look at some of the best Kansas City offense, it was when they had Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill was such a game changer. They could be down, and within 2 plays, Tyreek Hill was in the back of the end zone, and the game's been flipped upside down on its head. You know, to me, it's adding that Tyreek Hill like element to this offense and getting it more explosive downfield. What about you?
Yeah, I do think that the explosiveness and making sure that, I think that for Jared Goff, I just think that he avoided it the last couple years, is that when he gets off, his turnovers will go up. Fumbling the football when he's pressured. I just think that he should get credit for doing the great work in when he's blitzed. He should be credited because he did a lot of good things in reading and recognizing it. But at the same token, just making sure that he's a player that can handle pressure up the middle and things like that, and making sure that, get rid of the football when you need to, the fundamentals. I just think he's really a great football player that's just going to be able to do a lot of good things with this football team. And I do think that people do take pot shots at him, but it's just also the fact that nowadays it's like, hey, you're not mobile, so you're not as good as everybody else. And I do think he'll prove it, but man, I'm curious to see how, the contract plays all into this, how people view him. Because right now he's the most popular sports figure in Motown, and he's a guy that just, it's going to be tough because it kind of has the feel of like a Steve Young, where he was always in the shadow of Joe Montana, but until he won the Super Bowl, people just always said, you're not going to win the big one. So there's always going to be people that think that. So I was curious to see how that plays out. So
I was going to ask you, do you feel like that's like the one thing holding him back from being considered along with some of those elite quarterbacks, or being just on the outside of those elite quarterbacks? Sorry, my daughter wants to contribute to the show today. Do you think he has to win the Super Bowl in order to be put in conversation with guys like a Josh Allen, who hasn't won anything, Lamar Jackson, who hasn't won anything, but these guys are considered elite because of their physical gifts?
Yeah, I do. I think that he does got to win it. I do think he'll always be respected, but when you're making $50 million, that's kind of one of those things, right? The contract is going to play a part where, if you're making $50 million, I do think that it could be one of those things where the honeymoon phase with Jared Goff could end pretty quickly if he doesn't win this year, especially if he throws interceptions and things like that, right?
The contract obviously is going to have an impact on how people view him. But all that being said, right? So I just went through and I just named Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson as guys who haven't won anything. Both those guys have monster contracts. Do their massive contracts shape how people view them? I don't necessarily think so. And I think, again, it's because of their physical gifts that people give them passes. I think Jared Goff, it might not be the physical gift, right? Because he doesn't have an incredibly strong arm. He's not incredibly mobile or elusive. But what if his best gift is his mind? It's his ability to kind of diagnose, understand what has to happen, understand how the route has to be ran, understand what the defense is presenting him, and just making the smart pass, whether it's a check down or whether it's a 50-yard bomb. What if it's just making the smart play? And I think the thing is, what is so perfect about this offense and about him playing here and playing with Ben Johnson and playing for Dan Campbell, that's all they're asking him to do. They're not asking him to do anything other than just make the smart play and put the ball in that spot. If you have the ability to throw it 50 yards downfield and take the top off the defense because that's what they're giving you, please feel free to do it. But if not, we'll take the little 3-yard dump off to a running back who will scamper and pick up another 2, 3, maybe 10 yards, and we'll just keep the ball moving. It's all about moving the chains with this offense, and it's all about getting guys open. And I think the thing about Jared Goff is, physically, the arm, probably pretty average, maybe slightly above average in the NFL. Legs, definitely below average, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, we'll say 5 is about average, 6 is about average. We'll say his legs are probably a 3. He reminds me a lot of Tom Brady, but in cement. He doesn't move well, right? When the pocket starts to shift a little bit, he's got a little bit of wiggle where he can kind of step up and kind of elude a guy and throw, step up in the pocket and throw the ball. Or if he's got if the pocket rolls, he's got the ability to move 1 or 2 steps and try to make a play. But he's not the best at that. So, physically, it is what it is. Physically, he is probably the most average to slightly above average quarterback. I think what really separates him is the mental aspect of the game and the ability to move forward when a bad play happens or when something blows up. And it's the ability to lead these guys. It is all of the intangibles that I think really separate him and make him that good of a quarterback and puts him just outside of the elite territory. Again, I get he's not Patrick Mahomes, who's got legs, who can throw balls behind his back, throw balls between his legs, throw the ball 95 yards down the field. Same thing with Josh Allen, who's got a rocket for an arm, and Lamar Jackson, who can run all day long. I get it. He's not those guys. But the one thing that he does better than probably both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson is he sees the game. He puts the ball where it's supposed to be. He's not trying to force things. He's not trying to force plays. And he does a great job of shaking it off. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, both turn the ball over a lot because they're always trying to create some type of other play down the field. Patrick Mahomes sometimes has a problem with that. But Patrick Mahomes is so incredibly gifted, you tend to look past it because he'll throw you 3 interceptions, but he'll throw you 5 touchdowns in the same game. You're kind of like, all right, well, what are you going to do? But Jared Goff's not any of those guys. He just isn't. And he's never going to be any of those guys. And the contract that he signed, I'm completely comfortable with it. I do agree with you that it will impact some people's perception on him. But I think what he brings to the game, it's not something that you necessarily always see with your eyes unless you're trained to be looking for it. And it's just he makes the smart play. He does what the offense calls for, and he's not trying to do too much. And I think that is why he gets a bit of a bad rap. And that's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how much credit. And I do have the feeling, I've said it before recently in an interview, I think that if he wins it, he's going to have some of that talk of kind of like Trent Dilfer unless he balls out. You know what I mean? Kind of like, hey, he was, part of a great defense and, one of those guys that's not going to get some credit for it. But I hope he does because I think that, he really has improved his game. He's gotten a lot more accurate. He's been somebody that has been willing to do the work and put in time to master somebody's offense. So, and you got to remember, too, that Ben Johnson's offense wasn't something that, was, it wasn't something where he knew Ben Johnson beforehand. Ben Johnson did the work to say, okay, I'm just going to put together an offense that I think this quarterback can excel in. And the organization said, okay, this guy can do this, so let's obviously build an O-line, build a run game, give him receivers, a great slot receiver, and everything that a quarterback would need. And this guy can handle the ships and handle the ups and the downs. So now 2 other quarterbacks are going to have to learn to handle the ups and the downs, and that's going to be the quarterback for the Wolverines and the Spartans. Because this is weird because in talking about college football, it's kind of like in the state of Michigan. The Wolverines just are in a no-win position because last year's team won it all, and they lost so much talent, and they're facing an early tough test in Texas that it kind of has a feel of an 8-4 year to me. But the factor that I think now is being talked about is this dark cloud hanging over their head regarding the notice of allegations that has kind of started to come up regarding everything that happened with the sign stealing and everything that's kind of come to fruition and stuff like that. And that's been, spearheaded by the Netflix documentary coming out this week. So it's for Michigan, it's just a bunch of distractions that may derail Sharon Moore in his first year. You may have sanctions. You don't know what's going to happen in regards to penalties, bans, whatever, but it's going to be talked about all year. And on the other side of the coin, Michigan State is rebuilding, so the expectation is 4 wins. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're going to preview it, but I look at it like, okay, Aiden Childs, please stay healthy for Michigan State and weather the storm because Coach Jonathan Smith has to bring in a lot more guys. This is a football team that needs a lot more talent, and they're going to face some struggles. So,
well, y'all brought 60 dudes in.
He did, but yeah,
it's a lot.
That's what we were saying about when we were talking earlier about why I'm a little bit more concerned about the defense is that, yeah, you brought in a great talent, but they all have to gel together. Yeah, Davis true. And Arnold are going to be playing together for the first time. The defensive line, it makes sense they're going to gel, but it's not that easy to just all come together and play winning football, especially now that the Big Ten is much better. So to me, college football for me this year, it's going to pay attention to it, but with trepidation because I see a lot of losses for two clubs that are basically in the same position of, okay, you're starting in a different spot. You're starting in a spot where Michigan has to retool. Of course, they're going to have a lot of great talent, but you don't know how it's going to gel with your quarterback. It may be Orzi, it may be somebody else, but for me, it's just college football is like, oh boy, hold on. It's like the roller coaster, and you're not exactly sure how it's going to shake out. It's going to be bumpy along the way. It's going to be fun, but I think that there's going to be some bumpy roads along the way here. But to me, let's start with Michigan.
Okay,
how are they going to handle all the players that left?
See, that's the big concern, right? That's the one thing when you look at this roster, especially on paper, that's the big issue. Who's your quarterback? Who do you have playing offensive line? Is Donovan Edwards going to be able to carry the load at running back? What are you doing to kind of compensate with your tight ends and your wide receivers? Like offensively, you are basically hitting the restart button. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, and it's like, okay, you've got to replace a glut of guys on that side of the ball as well. I think this is going to be an incredibly telling year for Sharon Moore, especially if he can get through the year, because you've already brought up the notice of allegations. Sharon Moore at this point is viewed by the NCAA as a repeat offender. So there is cause for him to be suspended, and there is cause for him to get more penalties depending on what comes out with these NCAA allegations. So there's a ton. On top of that, you've got all of that swirling. You've got pretty much a brand new roster that you've had to hit reset. You've had to kind of rebuild this coaching staff because everybody else who was involved in the sign stealing scandal and everybody involved in everything else that happened last year basically went to the NFL. And a lot of the coaches that were here were taken by Minter. They were taken by Harbaugh. They found different roles with different teams in the NFL. Some of them have moved on to different ranks in the college game. So you are basically starting from scratch all over the place, which is crazy to think about, right? Like this is a team that I think currently nationally they're ranked like 9th in that first preseason college football ranking, which is kind of BS. It's kind of silly if we really think about it. I don't know if this team is legit a top 25 team. All that being said, I've got a ton of faith in Sharon Moore, and I think that is where, if this team is going to be successful, it's where they're going to be successful from. They're going to be successful from their head coach. You've seen him able to kind of navigate stuff last year. You've seen him call massive pivots in a game against Penn State where they couldn't really throw the ball and they couldn't move the ball down the field. And what'd he do? he turned around, he basically ran it for the entire second half, and they ran Penn State right out of any playoff contention. So I think with Sharon Moore being at the helm, he's a guy who's kind of been there, done that. He had to deal with the crap last year. He was able to navigate some of that. I think it's going to be pushing the right buttons. I think it's going to be putting the right guys in position. To me, the big surprising thing was the quarterback position. You are going with a guy who seems like he is an exceptional athlete. You know, if it's Orgy, it seems like he's an exceptional athlete, but can he throw the football? You didn't see him throw the football at all last year. I don't know if he can throw a forward pass. So the fact that they didn't go out and try to get anybody in the portal, the fact that they didn't bring in any high-starred recruits, the fact that they didn't get any NIL money to anybody and bring them in to kind of handle that quarterback position tells you that they believe that they might have enough to get the job done. So to me, it's going to be interesting to see how Sharon Moore handles the outside noise and how he handles the quarterback situation, because it's college football and everything hinges on what your QB can do for you. And when I look at Michigan State, I kind of feel like it's similar, right? Like Jonathan Smith seems like he's a hell of a football coach, and he seems like he's made this coaching staff much better. And they just brought in a ton of guys. But what is Aiden Childs? Like, I know he was one of the most sought after guys in the portal, but what is he? Like, nobody really knows. So is he going to be able to perform? Is he going to be able to live up to those expectations? Is he going to be able to really command this offense the way it's supposed to be handled? And I think both of these teams, even though they're kind of starting in different spots, I think their stories are very, very similar right now. You've got two new coaches, new philosophies. You're bringing in really and truly all new coaching staffs, and you don't really know what you have at your quarterback position. MSU might know a little bit more because Smith and Childs have that connection from Oregon State, but you really don't know what you got as far as your QBs go. And to me, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, and it makes it hard to win games in the college football game because your quarterback, like I said, controls so much offensively, and your offense puts your defense in spots to help you win games. So to me, it's going to be interesting to see what these QBs can do to start the season.
Yeah, it's going to be fun too. With Michigan State, it's kind of old school. Jonathan Smith's going to want to run the football. You know, when you're starting out, you just want to establish your culture. You just want to look the part. I think it's kind of like for Michigan State, you know, we can say it honestly, it's not about the final score. It's about steadily improving. It's about all the things that you'd say for teams. Kind of like, the best way to put it for those that are listening, this is the 2021 Detroit Lions. You got some talent at some spots, but you got to come together collectively. You got to learn the system. Childs is the guy that can make everything happen. So to me, I'm just going to go with 5-7 or, you know, kind of 4-5 win range and a bunch of losses that are probably going to be, I would say, early on, you kind of gel, you know, touchdown to 10-point losses, close games. And to me, it's just compete super hard against Michigan and don't get blown out by 50 against Ohio State. So it's just one of those things where results don't matter. It's about, like the Tigers, progression, seeing the young cats at different spots progress and just perform at a better level. For Michigan, you know, I could see them winning 9-10 games because they have the system in place, and Sharon Moore is a continuation of that. So on offense, that should kind of be a little bit more steady. I don't think you're in the class of Texas. That's going to be a loss. I think the Ohio State game is going to be a loss. But you look at it and you say, you know what? The intriguing factor to me, and I'm curious to get your sense with our last couple minutes, are you intrigued by Wink Martindale? I think that's a name that people know, but I think he'll do a lot more for that defense than people think. You go from a guy in McDonald to a guy like Wink Martindale, he can adapt anything. I think that he's going to come in and be like, you know what? They're going to play physical, be stout against the run. I like what he can do, his aggressiveness. And when you've seen what he's done in the NFL, I think that the 8-4 crowd, I get it, But I think this football team might be better than people think, especially if I think the X factor in my mind for Spartans is Childs. He's got to stay healthy. The X factor to me is Donovan Edwards. I think if he gains that confidence that I'm the guy and part of that running backs room, I think he started to showcase a little bit more confidence in the playoff and in the national title game, and to say, okay, put the ball in his hands. Now you have an opportunity to be in more ball games than people think.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm probably a little bit higher on both of these teams than what Vegas is or even what you are. I think for Michigan State, I can see them winning 6-7 games this season. I see them making a bowl game this year. As far as Michigan goes, I think Michigan 9 wins is probably where they're at. That's probably the ceiling for this team. I think what you're saying is right. I think Donovan Edwards is kind of the guy that a lot's going to fall on. And if he's able to step his game up, the team will be much, much better, and they'll be much further ahead than I think maybe where I'm expecting. So I'm sorry. She wants to talk too. You hear that?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Dude, we're just going to deviate real quick. So the new thing with this one is she's kind of figuring out her voice a little bit, and she's much like her dad and her uncle, and she just likes to talk a lot, and she likes to say a lot of things. So I'm sorry that she is intruding on our podcast, and she is making her, her second debut. I think the first time on DocNJock.
It's perfect. It's all good. I love it. And with our last 4 minutes, we can add the Lions have filled out their practice squad with a name that people know. Allen Robinson is now part of the Detroit Lions.
Oh, my God, really? Dude, you know what? I'd ever tell you my Allen Robinson story?
Tell it.
So back in the day when I used to cover high school sports, right, when I used to write for a couple of the newspapers, I would have to cover, like I said, high school sports, and I covered a bunch of Orchard Lake St. Mary's games. Like they were like my team. I just covered them a ton. I remember watching him, and I remember everybody telling me about, like, before I even went to the game, how great he is and how good he is. And they're like, he's going to be awesome. And I was like, all right, cool. So, like, I'll watch. And I watched James Ross as well. And I thought James Ross was really, really good on those Orchard Lake St. Mary's teams. I never seen it with him. Never. Then he goes to Penn State, and he plays pretty well. And the next thing you know, he's playing in the NFL. And I'm just kind of like, how is this guy in the NFL? I never got that he was that good. So the fact that he's on a practice squad roster, I mean, I guess makes sense, but I never seen him ever making the league, and prove me wrong. He's had a couple pretty productive seasons, but I mean, at this moment in time, it feels like the Detroit Lions are kind of filling out their practice squad with anybody who has Detroit ties right now, whether it's DBJ
right?
or
it's kind of like, please, if you can identify and prove a Detroit zip code, you can have a spot on the practice squad. Tom Kennedy's still on the practice squad. A little bit surprised that at this point, at this recording, Pecco did not make the roster, so our assumptions were wrong. He makes the practice squad. Maybe eventually he'll be a call-up, but I thought he did enough. That maybe even hints at DJ Reader being back week 1, brother. So that's a good thing. That practice squad is something that, when you look at it top to bottom, it has potential. Donovan Peoples-Jones is not officially on it, but I expect that, he just is slow to ink his name to the deal. So it'll be interesting to see how this practice squad evolves and can help this potential team. But you look at it, it's pretty good. It's good enough to say, okay, the 69 members of the Detroit Lions are poised and ready to go. So it's been a fun ride. Everybody that listened to the podcast and interacted and was all up in the podcast and Detroit Sports Podcast, it's really crazy to see. And then one final thing, we do have to give a shout out to Gina Trotman. It's unfortunate that in the paper it was kind of revealed that she had some contract demands, and Channel 7 said, no, we're not.
Channel 7 doesn't like to pay anybody. You remember this kind of thing with Justin. Justin couldn't get his contract demands met either, and they lost him. So it's bonkers.
It's unfortunate because people have their worth, and they feel like, hey, and the television business burns you out. So just give her credit for the great reporting that she did. She did a wonderful story at the Detroit Golf Club with a grandson and grandfather that was just really touching.
She was always awesome. When I was covering the Lions for a little bit, when I was working at 1130, I had a lot me and her kind of ran in similar circles when we were doing that.
Yes.
And she was out in Grand Rapids at the time, and she did a fantastic job. And I've always really liked her. I always thought she was awesome.
Yes. So it's a loss. Hopefully she gets back in the business in some capacity, but it's a tough thing. So football
real quick
frenzy's
before we go, I do want to give my little insight on the sign stealing documentary on Netflix with Connor Stallions.
Here we go.
So real quick, just briefly, I think Connor Stallions is a guy who really likes Connor Stallions and really thinks he is all of that in a bag of chips. On top of all of that, I don't think anybody should ever love anything as much as he loves Michigan. It becomes it becomes a bit of a psychological problem at that point. Yeah. So that's that point. The other thing that I really took away from it, right? And look, Netflix does a good job of laying things at your feet and letting you draw your own conclusions. I don't feel like this was a documentary. I feel like this was just a story, because they didn't really drill into anything. They didn't really drill down on anything. They didn't really go into anything. They just kind of like presented you some things. What I find interesting, they have some of the NCAA Inquisition, I guess, or interview, whatever you want to call it. And I found the NCAA to be quite interesting when Stallion's lawyer asks how they obtained the information that they obtained. The lady who was doing the questioning, she clammed up quick and she started stumbling over words and she got nervous. And then very quickly, that interview was cut short. So the whole thing with this whole entire thing is it seems like anybody who's been attached to a message board or any type of internet blog has kind of been in tune with everything, while the NCAA has been out of touch with everything and the actual beat reporters haven't really had anything. The message boards seem to kind of have everything. And the thing that is most interesting is how the information got from Connor Stallion's computer. And at this moment in time, the one thing that I took away from this is there might be some smoke and there might be some fire with Ryan Day's brother, who has a private investigation firm, and somebody illegally hacking into Connor Stallion's computer, kind of blowing the cover on all of this. Yeah. That was the one thing I took away from it. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting to really see how this plays out, because I think at some point the NCAA is going to have to turn over how they got their information and where it came from. I mean, they're going to make their decision. It's going to be what it is, because how they get their information doesn't necessarily matter. If he did wrong, he did wrong. They're like an independent source. But I think at some point they got to turn over that information. So to me, that'll be the most interesting.
Yeah, and really, I learned legalese that when you're accused of something, you say, I don't recall. If there's something that you did. I don't recall if I was standing at that game. I don't recall. I recall every single effing sign in the history of the world.
The whole Central Michigan thing. I was like, are you serious?
I don't recall.
When they showed him the picture, dude, he had a shit-eating grin on his face.
Yeah, everyone knows it's him.
What are we doing?
And so, to me, the best thing is that, okay, if we're ever in trouble, we're going to hire the guy that he hired. Because that guy was just like, I don't think that was Connor Stallions. That was somebody that was alleged to be Connor Stallion. So I can't sit here and talk about that. So it was a masterclass in legalese and bullshit. But that's how the legal system works, is that, there was a guy that kind of looked like Connor Stallions on the sidelines. Well, there's a lot of guys in the world that look like me. But, I don't recall if that was me. I don't recall that night exactly what I was doing and things like that. And so, hey, that's what you got to do. Look, it didn't add much. I didn't find it too appealing. I look at it like, all right, let's just finally fast forward to the part where the NCAA just tells people, hey, this is the result of our investigation. Here's the punishment. Because to me, if you want to prevent this, because right now, as we sit, I would want Michigan State to do this because I don't get a sense that there's any real punishment. So if you want somebody else not to do this, then you got to throw the book at Michigan and say, okay, 5-year ban, take away and withdraw the win, vacate the national title, do something where people say, okay, we will never have a Connor Stallions. Because right now I just want to go and say, Connor, is there like a couple million where you could kind of twist your arm and kind of do that for Michigan State? That's where I'm at right now. There's no deterrence for them. Like, Harbaugh walks away with a better job He takes three guys from Michigan to where he's at, and Michigan goes on, and they just sit there and go, what allegations? What proof? Michigan fans are great. They're just like, what proof? Well, the kind of thing that says that, he went and had people, send him tape of things. And I get the idea that, he had it and stuff like that. But, it's going to be crazy to see how this all shakes out in the coming weeks with the result of the investigation. Because that was a great hour. Good stuff. I'm looking forward to the start of football. Going out to Michigan State Friday for the campus. It's hopefully the first easy win against Florida Atlantic, I believe. And hopefully it's a great opportunity to be able to get the win and handle business. So we'll see. It's opening weekend. It's fall, baby. And you know what that means? Cuz I wish you a great Labor Day weekend and a fun time. It's going to be a great opportunity to talk football over the next several months. Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at AdamRSTROZ. You can see the special guest that joined us on this week's podcast. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. If you think that we're crazy regarding our thoughts on Michigan State, if you have issues with the Lions roster, hit us up. We'll always engage in some debate regarding what you think and what you heard on this week's episode. I can't wait to fire it up next week for the latest edition of Doc and Jock.
You fucking podcasters. I said don't let them in here.